She was a biotech icon with no children, or so the world thought. But one unexpected call from a frightened little boy shattered her reality. "Mom, can you come get me?" Those 8 words unraveled a legacy built on silence, exposing buried secrets, racial injustice, and a love she'd been forced to forget. What began as a personal reckoning soon sparked national reform. And now, the truth behind Dr. Monique Ellis's fall and rise is finally being told. The wind swept through the open terrace of a luxury hotel suite in Chicago as Dr. Monique Ellis, 39, finished signing the final page of a corporate merger worth $500 million. As one of the most influential black female biotech executives in the nation, she was known for her precision, poise, and utter detachment. Everything in Monique's world was controlled until her phone rang. Unknown number. Normally she would let it go to voicemail, but something made her pause. Maybe it was the emptiness she'd been ignoring since the last board meeting. Maybe it was the late afternoon quiet that made even the city noise feel distant. She picked up. A small voice trembled on the other end. "Hi. Mom?" Her grip on the pen faltered. "I think you're my mom. My teacher told me to call. My name is Jalen. I'm 7. My other mom got really sick today and she's in the hospital. I didn't know who else to call." Monique's world, perfectly designed and impenetrable, fractured. Jalen, 7. The name, the age, the tone. It sent her body into a paralysis she hadn't felt since medical school. A boy's voice, unsure but urgent, had cracked through the armor she wore every day in boardrooms and biotech labs. Her breath caught in her throat. "Where are you?" she asked, already reaching for her coat. Jalen gave the name of a public charter school across the city. She recognized the neighborhood. It was nowhere near the circles she operated in. The realization hit her like a cold wave. Monique had spent a decade building an empire rooted in logic and excellence, but now she was being pulled back into a past she thought she buried. A past defined not by shareholder meetings, but by a summer in Atlanta 7 years ago. A woman named Lena. Late nights filled with music and conversation, and a letter she never received. As her Tesla pulled out of the private parking bay, her GPS directed her through areas of the city she hadn't driven through in years. Boarded-up storefronts, playgrounds with rusted swings, and families gathered on front stoops. This wasn't just a trip to pick up a child. It was a journey through everything she had quietly distanced herself from. What she didn't know yet was that the voice on the phone had the power to unravel more than just her memories. It would expose a system that punished mothers like Lena for daring to raise a child alone. It would spotlight how even progressive cities hid legacy systems that made racial and class inequality feel invisible until it became undeniable. And it would force Monique, the face of diversity in science, to confront how deep the lines of separation ran. Even in her own mind. She gripped the wheel tighter as she saw the school ahead. A brick building with chipped paint and a mural of children holding hands. Jalen was waiting out front with his teacher, wearing a threadbare hoodie and clinging to a lunchbox covered in faded stickers. The moment their eyes met, she knew. He looked just like her younger brother had at that age. Same almond eyes, same unspoken questions behind them. Jalen stepped forward slowly. "Are you really my mom?" Monique's legs weakened beneath her. She crouched, unsure of the right words, her voice swallowed by the ache in her chest. "Let's get you somewhere warm," she whispered. As she took his hand, the impact wasn't just emotional, it was generational. What began as a personal reckoning would soon pull her into a legal and public battle that threatened the reputation she'd spent her entire life cultivating. Behind that child's question stood years of institutional silence, cultural barriers, and a society still reluctant to confront the lasting cost of exclusion. And this was only the beginning. The automatic doors hissed open as Monique Ellis stepped into the emergency room of St. Gregory Medical Center, Jalen's hand clasped tightly in hers. The antiseptic scent struck her first, sharp and sterile, masking the quiet urgency that pulsed through the waiting area. Around them, nurses moved with practiced efficiency, families whispered in corners, and gurneys rolled past with muffled urgency. But for Monique, it was all background noise. Her focus stayed locked on the small boy beside her, whose eyes, so much like her own, kept darting toward the nurse's station. A young black nurse named Brianna noticed them and walked over. "Are you here for Lena Taylor?" Jalen nodded. Monique kept quiet, her mind racing. It had been less than an hour since she heard that name, Lena, spoken aloud by a child. A name that had once been wrapped in jazz clubs, whispered dreams, and whispered goodbyes. The nurse motioned toward a row of molded plastic chairs. "She's in the ICU, admitted an hour ago. Her condition's serious. The doctor will speak to you shortly." Jalen sat down, hugging his backpack like a shield. Monique crouched beside him. "Do you want anything? Water? Snacks?" He shook his head. His silence wasn't just fatigue. It was caution, the kind of self-protective pause kids learn when they've seen too much and been told too little. Minutes passed, or maybe it was longer. Eventually a tall doctor approached. Latino, mid-50s with tired eyes and a clipped tone. "I'm Dr. Valdez. You must be Monique. Jalen's teacher told us you might come. Lena listed no next of kin, but the boy insisted you'd want to be here. Is she conscious?" "She's stable, barely. Late-stage leukemia. She refused treatment until recently, and by then the cancer had spread. She collapsed at her workplace, a local cafe. It was one of the waitresses who called 911. Monique swallowed hard. She didn't know what to say, didn't know what she was allowed to feel. Dr. Valdez continued. "We need a bone marrow transplant. Fast. Her best shot is a match from a first-degree relative." He looked at Monique carefully. "Jalen?" The name landed like a verdict. "He's her son, yes. But legally, we need authorization from a guardian. Is there documentation?" Monique hesitated. Jalen had no birth certificate on him. Lena's records listed no co-parent, nothing linking her. Monique sat back, her breath shallow. 1,000 board meetings, scientific breakthroughs, billion-dollar acquisitions, and now she was powerless in the place that mattered most. "I'll call a lawyer," she said quietly. Within the hour, Alana Green, her crisis attorney, arrived in a dark gray suit, tablet already in hand. "We need expedited guardianship and a DNA test," she said, already texting the county judge's assistant. "The boy believes Monique is his mother. Based on timeline and preliminary evidence, we have a case for emergency custody and consent rights. Lena's condition makes this urgent." Meanwhile, Monique was allowed a brief visit to Lena's room. She braced herself before entering. Machines beeped softly in rhythm with the ventilator. Lena looked almost nothing like the vibrant woman Monique had loved. Her face was pale, thinner, her arms lined with IVs and her hair mostly gone, but her expression, even in sedation, still carried traces of defiance. A nurse placed an envelope in Monique's hand. She found this in the patient's purse, said it was to be given to you if anything ever happened. Inside, a photo, a grainy shot of Lena and a baby. The baby had Monique's eyes, and a letter dated 5 years ago. I knew you weren't ready. I wasn't either. But I couldn't let them take this boy's joy just to protect your image. When your mentor offered me money to leave town, I realized even your success had rules I didn't fit into. Not with my background, not with my skin, but Jalen deserved love, not legacy. Maybe someday you'll see that. Monique clutched the photo to her chest. In a city that touted itself as a beacon of progress, a queer black woman had felt safer staying silent than stepping into the light with a child. Lena hadn't just protected Jalen, she protected Monique's future. But now that silence had nearly cost them all everything. The DNA results came back within hours. Confirmed Monique Ellis, biological mother. Alana secured emergency consent rights by morning. Jalen was prepped for the bone marrow procedure, his small frame dwarfed by the surgical bed. He asked one question before going under. If I help, will Mom wake up? Monique kissed his forehead. We're going to try everything. The transplant went smoothly. Jalen's cells were strong, resilient. But the emotional aftermath rippled deeper. Later that night, as Monique watched her son sleep beside Lena's hospital bed, the nurse handed her a tablet. You have a voicemail. It's from Wallace. Monique's pulse skipped. Dr. Charles Wallace, her former mentor, the one who handpicked her for the Ellis Grant Initiative, the one who told her to leave Lena behind or risk her rise in the biotech world. She played the message. I hear you're at St. Gregory. I hope you're not doing anything rash. You've built too much. Don't let this ruin it. Ruin what? She looked at Jalen, at Lena, at the two people, her silence almost erased. The voicemail was left unread. Outside the hospital, word was already spreading. The Ellis Foundation had just announced a new grant, $20 million for racial equity in maternal health access. But what no one knew yet was that this wasn't a branding move. This was personal, and it wasn't about redemption. It was about truth. Because for the first time, Monique Ellis had nothing to prove to anyone. She had a son. She had a second chance. And the world was about to see a different kind of legacy, one shaped not by secrecy and prestige, but by courage and reckoning. The sun was just beginning to rise over downtown Chicago as Monique Ellis entered her penthouse, Jalen's small hand still wrapped around hers. For years, this high-rise had symbolized accomplishment. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a skyline view, minimalist decor curated by an interior design firm that catered exclusively to C-suite clients. But now, as Jalen walked hesitantly inside, it felt cold, unwelcoming. You live here? His voice was soft, but curious. I do, but maybe it's not made for two. He wandered toward the balcony. She watched him press his palm against the glass. A child, looking out over a world that didn't yet make space for him. The next few days blurred into each other, split between the hospital and home. Lena remained stable, her vitals slowly improving. Jalen refused to be far from her side. Each night, Monique read to him from the books he had tucked into his backpack. His favorite? A battered copy of The Snowy Day. One evening, after Monique returned from a strategy meeting with her legal team, she found Jalen asleep on the couch, his drawings scattered across the coffee table. crayon depictions of a family. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a sun. One of the figures had curly hair and glasses. The smallest one wore a bright red hoodie. "That's me," he'd told her earlier. "You got the glasses right." She'd smiled. Each of these drawings told a story louder than words, of what he hoped for, of what he feared. But hope, in Monique's world, came with consequences. Her phone lit up. Caller ID, Charles Wallace. She let it ring. Then a text. "Emergency board meeting. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. She exhaled. The Ellis Grant Biotech Group, named partially in her honor after spearheading their breakthrough cancer therapy, was now under scrutiny. Her recent media attention had triggered questions from investors. Whispers had begun. What had been a personal revelation was quickly becoming a public relations crisis. At the meeting, she walked in alone. A long glass conference table reflected the expressions of 9 board members, 8 white men and 1 woman who rarely spoke. Wallace, seated at the head, cleared his throat. "Monique, we're concerned." She folded her hands. About the press, the social media coverage, the hospital footage. "You mean my son?" Wallace didn't blink. "You didn't disclose this relationship to the board. There are liability concerns. You mean having a child with a woman whose income fell below our partner threshold?" Wallace paused. "This isn't about race or class," he said carefully. "It's about stability. Optics. Optics." The word hovered in the room like a threat. For years, Monique had played by their rules. She had checked every box, worn the right suits, mastered their tone. Now she had broken the unspoken contract. "Don't bring your real life into the boardroom. Let me be clear," she said, her voice steady. "I'm taking a leave of absence to care for my family. During that time, I'm initiating a review of our equity partnerships, hiring practices, and donor vetting process. You don't have the authority to..." "I'm also announcing a new division under the Ellis Grant Foundation, focused on maternal health equity and early childhood care." "This is reckless," Wallace snapped. "What's reckless," Monique countered, "is pretending our success story includes everyone when it doesn't. Lena's name never should have been on a payroll where she had no access to health care. That's on all of us." The room fell quiet. And then, slowly, she slid a folder across the table. Inside, emails, documentation of a private investigator hired by Wallace 5 years ago, surveillance logs, photos of Lena and Monique in Atlanta, notes referencing reputational risk. "I know what you did, Charles, and now the board does too." The female board member, Dr. Clara Hensley, finally spoke. "You had her followed?" Wallace's face turned pale. "I was protecting the company. You were protecting yourself." Monique stood. "You all built an empire on science and silence. But if we can cure disease, we can cure our culture too. It starts here. It starts now." She walked out without waiting for a response. That evening she returned home to find Jalen dancing in socks on the polished wood floor. One of Lena's favorite jazz records played on her old Bluetooth speaker. He looked up as she entered. "You're home." She nodded. "Did it go okay?" "It did. Better than I thought." He ran over and hugged her waist. They sat on the couch together, watching the city turn gold. After a while, he looked up. "Mom, do you think people can change?" She paused. "I think it's hard. But yes, if they're brave enough." Later that night, as Jalen slept curled up on the couch, Monique drafted a public statement. "The Ellis Grant Foundation pledges $25 million toward dismantling structural inequities in maternal health, with a focus on Black and LGBTQ+ parents. We will also implement internal audits to examine class and race bias across leadership levels. Our future cannot be built on exclusion. It must be anchored in truth." She hit publish. The post went viral in minutes. Media outlets picked it up. Hashtags spread. Think pieces emerged. But the most unexpected message came in the form of an email from Lena's younger sister, Tamika. "Thank you for not disappearing, for staying. You gave my nephew something no boardroom could ever buy. A mother who chose him in the light, not the shadows." Monique closed her laptop and walked to the balcony. Below, the city pulsed with life. She no longer stood alone. The elevator doors opened to a floor Monique Ellis used to call home. 38 stories above ground, the executive wing of the Ellis Grant biotech headquarters shimmered with chrome, glass, and the kind of polished silence that only money could afford. This time, she wasn't alone. To her left walked Alana Green, her legal counsel. On her right, Dr. Clara Hensley, the only board member who had openly backed Monique since the day the controversy broke. Behind them, the quiet presence of investigative journalist Olivia Ray, whose expose on corporate bias in biotech had gone viral just days before, added weight to every footstep. As they entered the boardroom, the tension was already suffocating. The full board was present. At the head of the table sat Charles Wallace, his jaw tight, tie slightly loosened. His polished demeanor cracked just enough to show that he knew what was coming. Monique didn't sit. She stood at the end of the table, gaze sweeping across a room filled with men who once praised her innovation, while quietly policing her boundaries. "Before we begin," Monique said, "I want to acknowledge the presence of Olivia Ray. This meeting is being transcribed and observed by a member of the press, with full approval under our bylaws. Transparency begins now." Wallace opened his mouth to object, but Monique had already clicked her remote. The projector screen lit up behind her with a timeline. "Let's talk about systemic sabotage. First slide. A corporate memo dated 7 years ago. It outlined restrictions on employee personal relationships, deemed non-aligned with leadership expectations. Lena Taylor's name was highlighted. Next slide. Private investigator logs, confirmed payments made by Wallace's office, surveillance reports, redacted summaries of Lena's movements, when she went to work, who she saw, when she left Monique's apartment. "You weaponized my identity and hers," Monique said. "For what? To protect a reputation that was already built on selective inclusion." Dr. Harold Vance, the oldest board member, cleared his throat. "You're making serious accusations, Dr. Ellis." "I'm presenting documented truth," she replied. "Next slide, please." Photos of Lena's eviction notice, dated 2 weeks after Monique accepted the Ellis Grant directorship, issued by a property firm owned by one of the board's financial partners. Jalen could have ended up homeless because of this company's choices. The screen went dark. The silence was louder than before. "You all wanted a symbol of progress," Monique said, "but only the kind that didn't challenge your comfort. You celebrated my achievements, but erased the parts of me that made them possible. The love, the sacrifice, the courage it took for Lena to raise our child without support." Alana Green stepped forward and passed folders to each board member. Inside are our findings from a third-party audit, a bias in hiring, pay disparities, demographics that show executive leadership is 92% white and 83% male. These aren't just numbers. They're a mirror. And now, Clara Hensley said, it's time to look into that mirror. Monique stepped back and let the visuals speak. Slides now showed hospital data, disparities in cancer treatment among black women, case studies linking financial precarity to delayed diagnoses, testimonies from mothers who lost jobs because they chose to keep children outside traditional family structures. Then came the emails. Wallace's voice trembled as the words appeared on screen. Phrases like, "protect the brand from reputational dilution and unpredictable liabilities of same-sex parenting optics," sent between him and 3 board members over the course of 5 years. Dr. Hensley turned to them. "How long did you plan to bury this?" Wallace pushed his chair back. "Enough. What do you want, Monique?" "A new governance charter," she said. "One that includes community oversight, quarterly DEI audits, and redistribution of board voting power to include our Employee Equity Council. 30% of our profits will be redirected into racial and maternal health equity programs." "That's absurd," Wallace said. "You'll destroy investor confidence." Monique raised her chin. "They've already signed off." She tapped her tablet. A screen appeared behind her, showing signed declarations from shareholders representing 61.7% of voting power. Acquired in just 2 days, after Olivia Ray's story broke, and investor sentiment turned in favor of moral accountability. "I don't need your permission to clean this house," she said. "I already have the keys." Wallace stood. "You would dismantle everything we built?" "You built a house with locked doors," Monique replied. "I'm opening them." Dr. Vance rose slowly. "We need to vote." "No need," Clara said. "We already have quorum on charter reform, effective immediately." Alana handed Wallace a resignation document. "You may retain your shares," Monique said, "but not your seat." Wallace stared at the paper. His hand trembled. For a moment he looked decades older. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "Number I'll regret if I stay silent one more day." The signatures went down, one by one, Wallace last. When it was done, Monique turned to Olivia Ray. "We're ready to talk to the world." The press conference that followed drew national coverage. Headlines flashed across every major outlet. Ellis Grant, biotech restructures after racial sabotage scandal. Black CEO leads reckoning in historic corporate shift. But Monique wasn't there for the spectacle. She stood backstage, watching Clara field questions, while Jalen sat beside her with a coloring book. "Do you think they'll be nicer now?" he asked. She didn't lie. Some might. Others will push back harder. But we're not asking anymore. We're taking up space. Jalen looked at her, then at the cameras. "Are you scared?" "Only of staying quiet." In the days that followed, corporate watchdog groups praised the reforms. Advocacy groups requested consultations. Schools asked Monique to speak. But perhaps the most surprising message came from a private email. Subject: "From the Taylor's content. We don't want applause, just justice. Thank you for choosing us." Out loud. That night, Monique sat in Jalen's room as he fell asleep. She watched his chest rise and fall, a quiet rhythm of safety she'd never take for granted again. Then she turned off the light and returned to her desk, where the draft of the new employee contract lay waiting. At the top, in bold, "Inclusion is not a policy, it's a promise, and this time it would be enforced." Camera flashes exploded like fireworks the moment Dr. Monique Ellis stepped onto the makeshift stage in the atrium of St. Gregory Medical Center. To her right stood Jalen, dressed in a navy blazer and white sneakers, his hand tightly gripping hers. To her left, Lena Taylor, thinner, still recovering, but radiating a quiet defiance. Their arrival froze the room. 3 lives, once fractured by silence, now standing together in full view of the world. "Good morning," Monique began. Her voice was calm, but firm. "We're not here to spin a narrative. We're here to tell the truth." The press had gathered in record numbers. Local networks, national news, podcast hosts, live stream influencers. All of them tuned in to hear how one of the country's most revered biotech leaders had gone from boardroom acclaim to a family reckoning that sparked nationwide debate. Monique didn't lead with corporate policy or legal battles. She started with her son. "This is Jalen. He's 7. He likes drawing, science experiments, and grilled cheese sandwiches. He's also the reason I'm standing here today. Not as a CEO, but as a mother." She let that word hang in the air, a word some still struggled to associate with her. Lena reached for the mic next. Her voice was soft, weathered from weeks in the ICU, but unmistakably steady. "For years, I kept quiet. Not because I was ashamed of my son, but because I knew what silence cost me, and what truth might cost him." A few cameras panned in closer. When I was asked to walk away, to disappear for the sake of Monique's image, I did what many black mothers have done. I protected my child the only way I knew how, with distance. Murmurs filled the room, not judgment, but recognition. Monique stepped back in. What happened to Lena and Jalen wasn't personal error. It was institutional design. Our success stories are often edited to erase the parts that don't fit. Today, that ends. She then laid out a comprehensive announcement. Effective immediately, the Ellis Grant Biotech Group would implement a $25 million investment in maternal health equity, focusing on Black and LGBTQ+ parents. A whistleblower protection program designed for non-executive staff facing workplace discrimination. The formation of the Jalen Equity Council, a youth-led advisory board for community programs tied to the foundation. The press erupted into questions, but it was Olivia Ray, seated front row, who raised her hand first. "Dr. Ellis, many are calling this performative. How can you guarantee these reforms are more than a branding exercise?" Monique nodded. "Fair question. You can't guarantee sincerity, but you can measure accountability. Every one of our initiatives will publish quarterly data. Outcomes, not intentions, will guide this new chapter." Another reporter asked Jalen, "What's it like seeing all these people talk about your family?" He glanced at Monique, then Lena, then leaned into the mic. "It's like when you draw a picture for school and everybody wants to see it, but you didn't know your drawing was going to be homework for the whole class." The room laughed gently, but the metaphor landed. Later that evening, the conference footage trended on every platform. Hashtags surged. # Jalen speaks. # legacy rewritten. # Ellis reform. Think pieces flooded news sites. Some praised Monique's courage. Others accused her of abandoning her ambition to chase optics. But the most viral post came not from a journalist, but from a high school senior in Detroit. She stood there with her whole truth and didn't flinch. "I want to be that kind of scientist, that kind of mom, that kind of woman." Within days, Monique's inbox filled with letters from students, community leaders, even rival CEOs. But not everyone celebrated. Back at the Ellis Grant board offices, 2 major donors withdrew funding, citing misaligned values. A conservative talk show labeled the initiative as "identity politics run amok." An op-ed in a major business journal claimed the foundation's DEI expansion would alienate core investors. Monique expected all of it. Reform, she said to Clara over coffee, isn't about universal applause. It's about unshakable conviction. She also knew the pressure was just beginning. The real test wasn't the press conference. It was sustaining change long after the cameras stopped rolling. That's why a week later she sat with Lena and Jalen in a quiet community center on the city's south side, answering questions from a room full of teenage parents, social workers, and local organizers. One girl stood up, no older than 16, holding a toddler on her hip. They told me to give my baby up so I could finish school, but you kept yours. How? Lena smiled gently. It wasn't easy, and I was scared every day. But I knew he wasn't a mistake, even when the world tried to make him feel like one. The girl nodded, sat down slowly. Afterward, Jalen handed Monique a drawing. It showed 3 people again, this time under a tree, beside a building labeled the Jalen Center. There was a garden. Kids were playing. "Is that us?" Monique asked. "It's the future." And for the first time in years, Monique believed him. Because this wasn't just a press cycle or a performance. It was a reset. A story rewritten by the people who lived it. A cool breeze drifted across the city park, rustling the leaves and muting the voices of children playing nearby. Dr. Monique Ellis sat on a bench beside Lena Taylor, their hands resting on opposite sides of a folded blanket. Across from them, Jalen knelt in the grass, setting up chess pieces on a portable board. The sun glinted off the corners of the ivory and black squares. "You sure he knows how to play?" Lena asked, half smiling. "He beats me every third game," Monique replied. "Not because I let him. He's just methodical." "You mean he's yours?" They laughed, not loudly, but with the shared weight of knowing their lives would never be what the world considered traditional, and no longer needing that to be a problem. The laughter faded as a dark sedan pulled up near the curb. "They're here," Lena said, her voice tightening. Jalen looked up. "You think they brought cookies?" He was talking about Monique's parents. For weeks, Richard and Celeste Ellis had remained quiet. No statements, no public comments. But after the press conference, Celeste had sent a handwritten note. It simply read, "We're ready to listen, if you're willing." Now, as the 2 older Ellis parents stepped from the car, their movements were slower than Monique remembered. Richard's cane tapped against the pavement. Celeste's shawl fluttered as she steadied him. Jalen stood instinctively, clutching his drawing pad like a shield. "Hi," he said before anyone else could speak. Richard looked startled. Then with a slow nod, he stepped forward. "You must be Jalen." "I am. You're my granddad." That question, simple, sincere, cut through every accusation, every silence, every institutional betrayal that had come before it. Celeste knelt down beside Jalen. "Yes, if you'll have us." Jalen nodded once, then looked back at his board. "Do either of you play chess?" A pause. Then, surprisingly, Richard spoke. "I do. Haven't played in years, though." Jalen pulled out an extra fold-up chair. "Then let's start slow." Lena and Monique stepped back, giving them space. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. Monique watched her father move his first pawn with hands that once signed contracts to keep her life tightly controlled. She remembered the meetings, the public appearances, the whispered warnings. Keep it clean. Don't draw attention. Don't be messy. And she'd followed that script for decades, until Jalen's voice had blown it apart. Celeste joined them on the bench. Her tone hushed. We made choices we thought would protect you. I see now. We were protecting the wrong things. Monique didn't look at her. Do you know what it feels like, Mom, to have a child out there and think about what kind of people they might grow up fearing? Celeste nodded slowly. We thought hiding it would keep your name clean, but it made it hollow. They sat in silence for a few moments longer. You still have influence, Monique said, and access. What you do next will tell Jalen everything he needs to know about the world he's growing up in. We're not looking for public apologies, but we're not covering anything up anymore, either. Celeste glanced toward the board, where Jalen had already captured 2 pawns. We'll follow your lead, she said quietly. That night, Monique tucked Jalen into bed, his room now filled with soft lamps, floor pillows, and science kits she couldn't resist buying. On his nightstand sat a framed photo from the press conference. Lena, Monique, and Jalen holding hands beneath a banner that read, Legacy, Rewritten. Mom? Yeah? Grandpa said I remind him of you when you were little. You do. Do you think that's a good thing? She brushed a curl from his forehead. It's the best thing. As he drifted to sleep, Monique stepped into her study, where a draft grant proposal from the Jalen Equity Council sat waiting. Beside it was a copy of The Snowy Day, its pages slightly worn, its message still timeless. Across the city, headlines had shifted. New pieces explored the complexity of racial reconciliation, not just reform. The country was still debating, but now the debate had faces, names, and a child whose existence forced institutions to reckon with their reflection. The next morning, Monique would testify before a state oversight committee on funding disparities in health care for women of color. Lena would sit in the gallery. Jalen would wait at home, practicing chess. But for now, as the night wrapped itself around her apartment, Monique breathed in the stillness. Personal healing doesn't come from public moments. It comes from the quiet ones after. And this was where repair truly began. Exactly 1 year after a trembling voice called Monique Ellis from an unknown number, a new name was carved into the stone wall outside a repurposed library on Chicago's South Side. The Jalen Ellis Foundation for Equity, Healing, and Innovation. The building was modest, modern glass blended with preserved brick, sunlight cutting through large atrium windows. Inside, the energy felt electric. Part school, part research hub, part community sanctuary. But this wasn't just a dedication. It was a reclamation. Monique stood at the podium in front of a crowd of 300. Community leaders, medical professionals, student journalists, and 3 busloads of children from nearby elementary schools all filled the rows of folding chairs set across the garden. Behind her sat Lana Taylor, radiant in a deep green blouse. Next to Lena was Jalen, his legs swinging gently off the edge of his chair. He wore a name tag sticker that simply read, Co-founder. Today isn't about charity, Monique said. It's about correction. It's about what happens when a child shows up in your life and asks the one question the world doesn't always prepare us for. Will you choose truth, even if it costs you everything? The foundation had already launched 3 core initiatives. 1. HEAL, Health Equity and Access Lab, a research collaborative focused on data-backed policy recommendations to combat racial and gender disparities in maternal health outcomes. It partnered with over 20 hospitals across 5 states. 2. The Jalen Scholars Program, annual scholarships and mentorships for children of marginalized parents, working in hourly, contract, or service industries. 3. The Center for Truth and Transition, a restorative justice initiative offering organizational training and conflict mediation for institutions caught in public ethical scandals, not to erase their wrongdoing, but to guide them toward real repair. None of this existed a year ago, Monique continued. Back then I was building systems that looked progressive, but protected power. Now I'm building something that listens. The crowd responded with a standing ovation, but Jalen tugged at her sleeve. Can I say something too? She stepped back. He took the mic. Hi, I'm Jalen. I wanted to say thank you for helping my mom, and for helping my other mom too. And if you're a kid like me and someone tries to make ya feel small, just remember, you're not. He paused. You might be the reason something big starts. The applause that followed was louder than any she had heard in her career. Not because of performance, because of clarity. Monique turned toward the wall behind them. There, beside the Foundation's mission statement, hung a permanent exhibit, a timeline of personal moments. Lena's medical records, redacted for privacy, displayed beside national data on cancer disparities for Black women. A framed copy of the press conference speech. A hand-drawn family portrait by Jalen that had once lived on their fridge. The final plaque read, "Legacy is not inheritance, it's action." Over the following months, the Foundation became more than a feel-good headline. It became a blueprint. A city council in Baltimore requested Monique's model for health equity centers. A school district in Sacramento adopted the Foundation's mentorship playbook for formerly houseless students. In Detroit, the Jalen Scholars Program was expanded by local donors to fund trade apprenticeships and dual-language pathways. But there was also resistance. In late spring, a national columnist accused the Foundation of pushing a racial guilt economy. A coalition of biotech investors filed a quiet complaint against Monique's former company, alleging that its new diversity charter penalized neutrality. She knew the coded language. Neutrality, when unchallenged, always favors power. Still, the Foundation grew. Monique was invited to testify before the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, offering expert analysis on the impact of implicit bias in treatment outcomes. Her speech was direct. The data shows that Black women are 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than white women in the U.S. This isn't a medical flaw. It's a policy failure, and it's fixable. She offered hard numbers, budget models, and pilot program results. When a senator asked her what made her so personally invested, she simply said, "My family almost didn't make it, and families like mine deserve more than survival." That night, Jalen greeted her at home, holding a small cupcake with 1 candle. "For the Foundation's birthday," he said. "Make a wish." "I already have," she said. "I'm looking at it." Lena, now working as the Foundation's Director of Community Partnerships, joined them. The 3 of them sat on the couch, the news in the background muted. They didn't need to hear another pundit speculate on whether the Foundation was sustainable. They knew the truth. It wasn't built to impress. It was built to last. Across town, in a quiet retirement community, Richard and Celeste Ellis watched a televised special featuring Jalen and Monique. Richard sat silently, while Jalen explained his dream of building a kids' hospital that also had a gaming lab and robot nurses. Celeste touched his arm. "We could still help," she whispered. "We should have helped before," he replied. But the door hadn't closed entirely. 2 weeks later, A donation came through the foundation's website, anonymous, significant, with a note. This time, we won't be invisible. A year after Monique answered that call from an unknown number, she stood once more in front of a crowd. This time, she wasn't fixing a broken legacy. She was raising a new one, and it looked a lot like a child in Snickers, smiling as he drew another sun on another page. The last of the guests had gone. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was over. Empty folding chairs dotted the community center lawn as late sunlight washed over the lettering on the stone facade. The Monique Ellis Foundation. Healing built forward. Inside, Monique Ellis stood at the window, watching her son ride his bike in wide circles around the parking lot. A mural of him, crayon in hand, cape on his back, was nearly complete on the far wall, painted by local artists who'd volunteered after watching Monique's interview on national television. A year ago, she might have called this entire arc an unnecessary detour. Now it was the reason she breathed differently. There had been moments she wanted revenge, on the system, on her father, on the companies that applauded her rise while burying the truth that shaped her. But that desire, sharp and cold, had slowly given way to something deeper, not softer, just wiser. Redemption isn't erasure, it's reckoning, and she had reckoned with every version of herself. In one of her last board meetings before stepping away, she told her colleagues, "We can't innovate if we keep replicating exclusion. Legacy shouldn't be a weapon, it should be a bridge." That quote had gone viral, but she didn't say it for the headlines. She said it for Jalen. That night, as Lena flipped through a grant application and Jalen poured cereal into two mismatched bowls, Monique sat at the kitchen table and wrote her final letter of the year. Not a press release, not a legal briefing, just a letter to herself. She wrote about the silence, the years she let fear shape her future, the people she'd cut off before they could leave her, the places she refused to return to because they reminded her of who she was before the degrees, the equity stakes, the title. She wrote about Lena, the woman who protected their son when Monique could not, the one who faced eviction, illness, and erasure, and still made sure Jalen never stopped believing in joy. She wrote about her parents, how grief and prejudice had twisted their love into something rigid, and how Jalen's innocence, unfiltered and insistent, had cracked that armor just enough. Most of all, she wrote about possibility, because if a child's phone call could reset an empire, then what else might be possible when we listen? Across the country, organizations had started reaching out, not for show, but for strategy. Schools wanted toolkits. Hospitals requested community liaisons. City councils asked for data, budgets, and help shaping policy that didn't just react to injustice, but prevented it. The Monique Ellis Foundation had become more than a symbol. It was a signal, a call from the future to the present. And though Monique never chased the spotlight, she knew her story had broken through for a reason. It wasn't because she was perfect. It was because she chose to speak when silence had become the norm. That, she realized, was the greatest legacy of all. Not the building, not the funding, not the reforms, but the simple truth that a black woman who had once been told to shrink by family, by industry, by fear, had expanded anyway, had made room for a boy who wore hoodies and told the truth, and had reminded the world that the strongest structures aren't built to protect image. They're built to hold people. Jalen ran back inside, out of breath. "Mom, we forgot the cupcakes." She smiled, slipping her arm around his shoulder. "Then we have something to look forward to." As they stepped outside together, laughter ahead and light behind, the world didn't change in that moment. But it had already started.